What's up, Crusaders? Welcome back to another episode of Arcade Crusade. In today's video, we are going to continue the whitewater restoration. This will be part 3 in the whitewater restoration series. If you've not seen parts 1 and part 2, I suggest you go back and watch both of those just to see where we're at. In the last episode, we completely tore down the upper playfield. In this episode, we are going to start rebuilding the upper playfield. So I spent all of yesterday cleaning, waxing my upper playfield, cleaning all the ramps, all my plastics, cleaning Bigfoot. I spent all of yesterday just cleaning stuff. I did not videotape any of that stuff because it's not fun to watch. It's just me cleaning for hours. So everything's clean, so now we're at a point where we can start putting the upper playfield back together. So we're over at the bench right now, and let me zoom in. All right, so I got the upper playfield on the workbench right now. I left the factory Mylar on up here, and I left the small piece up here because we have a cliffy that's going to protect the vertical up kick drop. And then I left the one on here because it gets so much ball traffic. Every ball that's plunged comes right here. And instead of dealing with trying to freeze this off and peeling up inserts, we're leaving the factory Mylar on. I got this thing super clean. It's now waxed, fresh coat of wax on it. Cleaned all the posts. I mean, we are good to go to start putting this thing back together. I took all the ball guides off. So the first thing we are going to do is our cliffy is going to go on, and every time you get a cliffy, it's going to have a protective film on it. So first thing you want to do, peel the film off that cliffy. All right, so there's the little stuck on the corner. There we go. All right, so we got the entire film pulled off of our cliffy there, and this cliffy is just going to go up here and line up with these holes on the upper playfield up here. This screw won't get installed till we get Bigfoot put back in, because that is where one of the flashers is at, and then these other ones will be held on by the ball guides. But actually, before we do that, let's do the LEDs on the underneath for the inserts, and then we will start putting bulbs on the top. So flip the playfield upside down, and we have 4 LEDs for our inserts here. And let me get out a nut driver just so we can screw all these in tight while we got it up here. All right, so I have clear non-ghosting 44 bulbs here. Actually, while we're in here, let me make sure. We got a little bit of goop by this insert. I want to get it out. There we go. All right, we'll just shake everything out of that insert. All right, now we will take our non-ghosting clear LED, and there's 4 on the underside of this playfield, so I'm just going to go through and put all 4 of these in. And I find that clear non-ghosting helps with LED ghosting, and it just makes your inserts look nicer. And then same thing with the clear top, I think makes your inserts brighter. Frosted's better for dispersing light, but I think these make your inserts a little bit brighter. So I'm just going to come in here and tighten all these, so once we get them lined up, they will not be moving anymore. Nice and tight there. Just gonna make sure these are centered from above. All right, and there's all 4 of our insert bulbs underneath the Playfield. Now we will flip this thing back over and we will do the GI. So we have 1 GI, and these are frosted 44 bulbs. 1 GI there, 1 here between the rubber, and I did frosted up here because I always do frosted in GI, cool white frosted. Then we got 1 back here, and then I'm gonna do something special for this last one in the corner. This right here is a matrix LED bulb. This is a flex one, so I can kind of aim it up into the mountains. But this is a matrix LED bulb by Comet Pinball, and what it does is it allows you to hook an LED strip up to this bulb. So I got a splitter. I'm gonna hook up 2 LED strips in the back by the back mountains. I'm gonna adhere the LED strips to the backboard, and they're completely gonna light up the back mountains in the back of the game. So I'm putting a special bulb in here, and then we got a splitter and an extension cable so we can nicely put all of these in place. But yeah, it's basically just gonna go on just like that, and the bulb's gonna shoot up. So just make sure that's out of the way. All right, now our Cliffy can actually go on. And then we can start putting our ball guides back on. So this is the big main ball guide. This is the only one up here that has a nut underneath it. So this can get lined up like so. We will get the nut on. There's a nut and a washer that screws it in underneath, and then 2 wood screws for it. So just get these lined up here. And there goes our Cliffy. See what size this is. And just make sure when you're tightening this, your GI wire isn't in the way. And I'm just gonna get this not tight, but close to tight, just so we have enough to be able to slide this around. And of course now we're stuck on the other side of the LED that we just installed. There we go. All right, so now we can actually take our Cliffy and slide it under here. You just want to make sure all of these holes are lined up. I'm going to put in the wood screw at the one down here first. Okay, so we got that somewhat tight, and then we will take our second wood screw and flip this to the front so you guys can see. We got our Cliffy here and our ball guide here. We are just going to do the exact same thing. Just get it through the Cliffy, get it through the ball guide. And you just want this Cliffy to be as lined up as it can be with the other screws it needs to line up with. It's pretty good right there. All right, so when you got the ball guide tight there, we'll get the one down here completely tightened up. We'll get up here. All right, that's nice and tight. And then we will come back from the underside and finish tightening up our nut. All right, so now we have our Cliffy drop plate installed up here. We got all of our bulbs installed up here. We can quickly do a couple rubbers here. So there is a 2-inch rubber. Well, actually, let's do the rest of our ball guides before we do anything else. And like I said, I spent all yesterday just cleaning and polishing up all these ball guides. And this is the one that goes on the inner loop here, and then I believe this is the one that goes right here. Yeah, it has to go like that. And then this one goes up here like so. Yeah. So I'll double check my pictures just to make sure I got everything set up correctly. But that should be it. Yep, so we can put our ball guides on just the way we have it. Just while I have them off, I'm going to put this on. This is a 2-inch rubber. It is I went with clear again, like I did on Twilight Zone. Of course, Titan rubber. That is a clear 2-inch Titan rubber that goes between those posts there. And now we can take all of our 1/4-inch wood screws and put all of our ball guides on. So just gonna start with the upper one here and work our way down. But yeah, if you're gonna clean and wax this upper Playfield, I highly recommend taking all the ball guides off because they're pretty small. They come off super easily, and then you have free reign. Once you take all the bulbs out and everything, you got free reign to completely tear down this mini Playfield. So, all right, those are tight enough for now. Let me make sure I have this one up here the right way. Yep, it should hang over just like so. We'll just get this one started and then grab this one. All right, so we got both of those started. And now just the big one, and this big one we're only gonna put 2 of these in because the last one is for our Cliffy, and the Cliffy one, like I said, the Bigfoot flasher is attached to it. So we're just gonna put in these 2 ones right here. And now I'm just going to come back through and tighten all these up. So there's that ball guide tightened up. Come to this one back here. This is for our upper flipper. That one tightened up. All right, so we got all of our ball guides tightened up there, and then the last one will get tightened up once we get our Cliffy down in there. Next, we can put our post rubber on. I'm going with light blue in the upper playfield because I think it matches the aqua pretty nice. So we got our light blue post rubber on. And let's see what we have left to do. We can wait on replacing these flashers for a while. I took those out. Yeah, we're pretty much at a point now where we have enough back together that we can rebuild the upper flipper. We'll replace the end of stroke switch and then mount the upper flipper back to the playfield. And then once that's on, the opto can go back on, we can put Bigfoot back on, and then our ramps can start going back on after that. I ended up having to order a new Bigfoot ramp and a new disaster drop ramp. Both of them were cracked beyond belief. I thought they were in okay shape, but when I was cleaning everything yesterday, they were just super cracked. So I had to order a new Bigfoot ramp and a new disaster drop. My Insanity Falls is decent, it's not perfect. If it ever breaks, I'll just order a new one, but I didn't want to get one at this time. So let me get everything ready that I need to get ready to show you guys how to rebuild the upper flipper on whitewater. So let me grab my stuff and we'll get set up for that. All right, guys, so we are over at the workbench. I have the upper flipper pulled off of my whitewater, and I'm going to show you how to rebuild this and things to look out for. But the main thing to notice first is normally on WPC games, and especially with your rebuild kits, you're going to see that your flipper arm is going to have an arm that comes off where a spring connects and goes over to the bracket over here. Now on the upper flipper on whitewater, you'll notice that they're still using the conical spring that they used on System 11 games, and prior to that, you know, System 6, System 7. They use this conical spring on every flipper, and then when they moved to Fliptronics, that conical spring went away and they put the arm and the spring over here. Now this bracket is made to have the arm and spring. The reason that whitewater does not have the arm and spring like that is that where the upper playfield sits on whitewater, this flipper, if it has that arm, it'll smack into a ball guide on the lower part of the playfield. So on whitewater, when you rebuild this, you can use the WPC rebuild kit. Just make sure you have a conical spring. You could reuse your old spring, but make sure you have a conical spring to rebuild it. When I took the flipper out of the playfield, what you'll need to do is it's going to be mounted up on the playfield like this, and your flipper bat is going to come through the top of the flipper bushing right here. And what you need to do is come to the back side of the flipper, and you got to loosen this nut and this Allen key combo right here. Loosen that enough so you can pull the flipper bat outside of the flipper assembly. So I already have the flipper bat off because I needed to get it off to pull it off the game, which you will need to do also. You can rebuild your flippers still attached to the game. The upper playfield on whitewater makes it pretty easy to pull it out, so not a big deal. The first thing you're going to want to do is, well, one, take a bunch of pictures. Take as many pictures as you need before you take this thing apart. If you replace the end of stroke switch, which I will be doing, you're going to need to solder a couple wires back on. So make sure you take pictures of how those went on, how your end of stroke switch mounted, how your arm mounted. The first thing you're going to do after you get the flipper out of your pawl here is you are going to loosen the coil stop. And your kit should come with 2 new screws for the coil stop and a new coil stop. So that is the coil stop pulled out. There is our, wow, look at how mushroomed that is. So if you look at that from the side, you can actually see the concave in the coil stop from all the years of abuse. Anytime you see a mushroomed coil stop like that, well, the concave, the mushroom will be on the actual flipper link itself. But anytime you see that, you know this thing's got a ton of use. So that's been pulled out, both of our screws. Now our coil can pull out. And take note of, there's a coil sleeve inside of here, and if your flipper was well taken care of, this will not be melted inside the coil, and it should freely move and pull out just like so. So we're going to be replacing this in our flipper rebuild kit. Coil sleeves out. Okay, so that's next. Next, we can now take out the entire linkage assembly. And there's our old spring, and that's our entire linkage assembly pulled out. And yeah, you can see the tip of that is mushroomed, like I was saying. So you should have a nice flat top normally, and this is just completely destroyed from years of abuse, just hitting that coil stop. So that's now taken off. So that can go to the side as well. Put this back on just like so. And we can leave this for now. We can completely disconnect our end of stroke switch, and we can take off our flipper bushing here. So one thing to notice, this nylon, what looks like plastic, this is made out of nylon. This is called your flipper bushing, and no flipper rebuild kits come with a new flipper bushing. My recommendation is always replace this. There's no reason not to replace this. I also order the screws. These are 6/32 3/8 long screws, and the lock nuts for the back. I get nylon lock nuts to put on the back here. I order all of that, replace everything. These are your flippers. You don't want to be tearing these apart all the time. So we will want to take off that next, and let me get the correct bit for that. That's good. So now we are going to come to our nylon flipper bushing. When you take this off, so the reason, if you're ever going to take these off with your bracket mounted still to the Playfield, and it mounts with 8 of these 1/4-inch wood screws around this bracket. If you ever take this off and you try to remove this flipper bushing, there are nuts on the backside of the flipper bushing, and if you try to remove these screws, those nuts are going to fall deep into your game, and you do not want to deal with that. So might need a that one off, and we may need one size smaller. Sometimes they'll get seized up and you'll have to come to the back side and loosen the nut off. So that's all 3 of our nuts off. We can put those to the side, and we can take the rest of these screws off till this bracket gets removed. All right, so now we got our flipper bushing off, put to the side. So now the only thing left on here is the coil bracket here, and that stays on. You don't really need to replace that, but while you're here, you might as well tighten it up, make sure it's tight. So that's back on. And then the other thing we want to take off is our end of stroke switch. So we can actually take this off and we can clean this entire bracket here, and we'll get it nice and shiny back to the silver that it was, get all this solenoid dust off of it, and then we can start putting this back together. So I'm just gonna go ahead and remove the screws that hold on the end of stroke switch here. And we'll talk about the basics of gapping an end of stroke switch and all of that. Talk about that after we do this. So we'll need this plate in order for the screws to stay together. And there we go, we got a nice switch stack just falling apart on us. These are completely loose, so there's really no reason it should be hanging on. They're just stuck to the switch. So we need to reuse those screws. We don't have replacement screws for those. See if I can put this switch back together now that it's completely fallen apart. There we go. All right, so I am going to go wash this in the sink, clean it up with some Novus. We will get the bracket nice and clean. You can just wash this with some nice soap and water. Doesn't have to be too hot or anything. Just clean this up, and then we will come back and I'll get the soldering iron warmed up. We'll get the wires off this, mount our new end of stroke switch, transfer the wires over, and then we can rebuild everything. And then we can get ready to put it back on the mini playfield for whitewater. So I'm gonna go clean this up and we'll pick up from there. All right guys, so I went ahead and I cleaned the entire bracket the best I could, wiped it down with some Novus 2. There's always gonna be a little coil dust you can't get rid of unless you really soak this thing, but this is good enough for me right here. And I got the new end of stroke switch, and based on the picture that I took, I have mounted it the exact same way. Let me zoom in for you. So the way is that the flipper arm will hit right there and make contact. So I just got these hand tight just so the switch would hold for now. So we'll zoom out a little bit and I will tighten this up. And you just want to make sure you're straight, so when your flipper arm hits it, you got a nice even straight contact with the arm of the flipper. So looks pretty good right there. And I'm just going to tighten this up. You want to make sure these are nice and tight because it's just going to take a beating from that flipper hitting it every time you flip it. So get these nice and tight. All right, so that's nice and tight there. Now we are ready to come at it with the soldering iron. I have the original one right there. Just gonna actually go a little bit higher here. And what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna come at it with my soldering iron here and heat this solder up until we can pull this original wire off, just like that. And normally what you want to do is wrap it through the holes, and whoever did this one, I don't know if this was replaced at one point, they did not wrap it. So what you can do to make sure you don't screw up is do one wire at a time. I'm not going to do that, so I have a little bit more room here to work, but I know this black wire goes on the bottom lug. It's the long lug here. I know that's for the black wire, is the bottom lug. and then the top lug will be for my orange. So again, I'm just coming at it with some solder, get it heated up, and that'll pull right off. So that is our old end of stroke switch completely beat and pulled off. So we can take that off, clean the tip of your soldering iron over here, and now we're in a spot that we can do these one by one. So what I like to do is wrap the wire through, and usually around if I can, but might be too stiff from the solder that was already on it. If you can just get it to sit like that. So you got two options when you do this. You could either come through and just kind of, wrap the wire around how you would like to, and then you're making a good physical contact, kind of like this. And then what you would do is just wrap this wire around here. But actually what I usually do is I just come in through the bottom here, get it to hold with a little bit of pressure just on the base there. And what you can do is you can just come at it with a little bit of solder, just wrapped through that hole right there. And actually I'm at the end of my solder roll here. I have another roll, but hopefully this one does it. And you are just going to add solder to it and just make sure you completely fill the hole and get it just nice and flowed on that entire solder pad there. We got a nice even river of solder right on our black here. You just want to pull on that, make sure you're solid. We're nice and solid. We got nice even solder. That's a good solder job there. And then we are going to do the exact same on this upper one here. And again, just kind of get it to go through that tab and just sit there with a little bit of pressure, just like that, right up to the casing of the wire. We'll just add a little more at the tip right there. All right, there we go. There's our orange wire. So sometimes they won't hold as nicely as you'd like them to. You got to kind of get your hand behind it. We got a nice solid connection there. Nice solid connection on our black wire there. And now our end of stroke switch is on. So now we can put the brand new flipper bushing on, and this is just going to go on just like this and face up. And these plates here are actually threaded, and like I said, I have brand new screws for this, so we don't have to use the old ones. And let me zoom out a little bit. So I got brand new screws for these, so you can just line up your bushing here and just kind of get them started hand tight. And like I said, these are 6/32 3/8 screws. Pinball Life sells them. Every time I order a flipper rebuild kit, I order a new flipper bushing, I order these screws, and I order some nylon lock nuts. And with the combination of those three things, that is, and the flipper rebuild kit, that's everything you need to rebuild your flippers. So we will just continue tightening this up. once you get the 3 of these fairly tight, then you want to come with your nylon lock nuts and replace the ones we just took off. So I got brand new nylon lock nuts to put on the back side here. Just get these started hand tight. Actually, it might be better if you buy I know Pinball Life sells some thin ones. It might even be better if you buy the thin ones instead of just getting these, because they'll hold to more of the threads. And we'll see if these don't hold too well, we might have to put the originals back on. Just come at it from both sides. That's on pretty snug. Come to this top one here. That's on real snug. And then we will come to this one here. All right, that's all 3 of them on real snug, the nylon locking around it. We can be confident those are not going anywhere. So that is brand new flipper bushing, new screws, new nylon lock nuts. We got our end of stroke switch on and soldered, looking good. Now we can, I mean, we're pretty much almost there. So the one thing that I did note when I was talking about this, so first thing, before we do anything, we will put the new, every time you do a flipper rebuild, and actually you can do this more often than just doing flipper rebuilds, this is a new coil sleeve. So take your new coil sleeve, and it's just gonna go right inside of this coil. All right, and there's our new coil sleeve inside of there. And now our coil can get ready to go back on. You'll just want to push that sleeve in there. Sometimes they're a little tough to get in there based on the coil. Sometimes you got to replace the coil if they're melted, but this one should be all right. For what we're doing, this one should be all right. All right, so we got the new coil sleeve in. That's not a big deal. The main thing I wanted to show you guys is, so on whitewater, like I said, the upper Playfield, where it's mounted, there's a lower ball guide that gets in the way. So what I'm going to do is we need to take this bracket off, and we're going to use a conical spring instead. So we're going to remove this bracket where the spring normally attaches because it will not work for this. And then we are going to put this back together just with the washer. So I'm just going to get this kind of tight. Doesn't really matter right now while we're waiting for this. Get the right nut driver for it. There we go. So I'm just tightening this up just somewhat before we get the flipper on. So that's enough for what we need right now. So mainly what we're gonna do is, the way this flipper was mounted was just like this, because when the flipper turns, the end of stroke hits there. So we wanna shove this through, we wanna shove the brand new part, brand new Paul flipper link assembly through, and now we're ready to put on our brand new coil stop. So this will come in your flipper rebuild kit as well. So it's going to come with the end of stroke switch, it'll come with the linkage, the Paul, and it'll come with the return spring for WPC. We are going to be using, which I completely forgot to put on, we are going to be using the conical spring. So that's going to go on to, it's just going to lock in here and then go around this side here. So actually let's put the spring on because I forgot that. All right, now that can go all together. We got our brand new compressed conical spring. And yes, these springs are worse than the WPC springs. The conical springs are worse. They wear on your linkage. But given the design of the upper playfield on whitewater, your other choice is to like continue. You can use this, but you got to bend the arm so you're in a position that you can actually do something with it. So, and there's that WPC spring that we don't need, but no problem having an extra. And we got brand new screws and lock washers with these, so we can get these started. You can just get these hand tight, and then what you're going to do is take your screwdriver here, and whenever you're tightening the coil stop, when your flipper hits, it's going to push all the way in. It's going to hit the end of the coil stop every single time, and your coil stop's going to take the most damage of anything. And one thing I did forget to mention, always mount your coil with the mounting tabs. Always mount your coil with the mounting tabs away from the coil stop. This end is the coil stop right here. Always mount your mounting tabs on this side, because if they're on the other side, they're more prone to break off from the constant hit of the coil. But one thing you want to do is when you're tightening this, you want to squeeze your coil together just like so. You'll kind of have to, it might be easier, probably easier from the side, and you just alternate. But you want to squeeze your coil together from both sides on the coil stop and tighten your coil stop up. And we're going to do the same thing here on this side. And now we're at a point where we can really crank these down. So like I said, squeeze together. And squeeze together. Really make sure we're tight here, because if you have any slop in your coil stop, it's not going to play nicely. So really tighten these up. You don't want this bracket to move, because it takes all the abuse in your game. So we got the coil stop completely tightened, new flipper bushing, new end of stroke switch. Everything is back together and ready to get hooked up to the upper playfield. So now I can grab the upper playfield and we can mount this back onto the bottom of the upper playfield. We can slide our new flipper bat through, properly gap the flipper bat, get it lined up with the ball guide, tighten it up, and then that is the entire flipper rebuild process, all the way to putting it on the playfield. So I'm going to grab the upper playfield and we will put this back on. All right, so we got the upper playfield on the workbench. We have our brand new rebuilt flipper ready to get mounted back on the game. Right here is the hole for your flipper bushing. That's just going to line up like so. Make sure your wires are completely out of the way. All right, so that's all the wires out of the way. And now we can start putting our wood screws in and get this screwed back into the bottom of the playfield here. So you're only going to be afforded so much room just with how these line up. Just 1/4 inch wood screws again. Really just want to get lined up. So we got one started right there. Might have to put a little bit of pressure on this to get it to line up as we kick it over. There we go. Starting to get all of our screws to line up here. All right, so I went ahead and I got all 8 wood screws in the bottom of the Playfield. They're completely tightened up and ready to go. So now the only thing that we have left to do is to put this flipper, and let me get my flipper gap tool, to put this flipper on the top of the Playfield. And the Marco's rebuild kits come with the gap tool. The Pinball Life ones do not. I have one left from a Marco's kit. This was a Pinball Life kit. And we will flip the Playfield back over. And that is our brand new bushing right there. And we will slide all the way through. And what we want to do is this flipper spacer right here is just going to stay underneath right here as we tighten this thing up. But what I'm focused on right now is I just need to make sure that our flipper actually goes through and there we go. So now our flipper is all the way through right here through the pawl, and we can go back to the top side. I'll need to get a socket to tighten this up. Let me get the correct socket size for this. One smaller, hopefully. Yep, that's it. All right, so now we can come to the top side of the Playfield here, and this is a lot harder when you're not, well, it's easier and harder to do it this way. Easier because you have full control of the flipper from the top here, and we can slide our gap tool in right here and just kind of leave that in place as we tighten this thing up. And the main thing we want is we want to make sure we are completely even with the ball guide there. You just want the front of the rubber to be completely even, so when the ball comes down, you're good to go. And then what you want to do is push down, so then you got a good gap, and then you are going to find your adjustment from under the Playfield. I'm just going to tighten this with my gap tool underneath, and there's no like easy way to show this. Let me lift the camera up so you guys can see. I'll just go right here, but all I'm doing is I got my Marco's tool underneath the flipper, so we properly set our flipper gap. That is the number one thing you really need to worry about. And then I'm just coming at the back side of our pawl here. We're just tightening this up. And now we can just continue to, actually I'm going to loosen a little bit just to make sure that I'm pushing down on my gap tool. You want to push down on your gap tool to really make sure you got your gap right. So I'm pushing down here, and we'll get it fairly tight, and then we'll worry about lining it up once we're tight. So now, still a little bit of play here, and we really just want to make sure that we are just completely lined up with the edge of the ball guide right here, and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. So the ball on the upper playfield, it comes down and feeds right off this ball guide right here, and we want to make sure that the edge of our flipper is completely straight with that. And right there, sometimes you got to push a little bit further just to get it where you want it to be. But right there is pretty lined up. So now we can come to the back side here and just try to hold it in place while you tighten it. And it's just going to be trial and error until you get it completely tight and where you want it to be. But I mean, yeah, right there is pretty lined up with where I'd want it to be. Feeding from that ball guide. So now we can just continue to hold it in place as we tighten the flipper up. You want this to be absolutely as tight as it can be. All right, so that's perfectly lined up how I would want it lined up. And see if we can shove our tool back in there now that I have it pulled off. There we go. So we got our tool shoved back in there, and now I will just come to the bottom of the playfield, and I'm just gonna give it a few more cranks just to make sure we're nice and tight. I'm just gonna do this in my lap so I actually have some leverage. But you really want this to be as tight as it can possibly be. And there it is. That is as tight as it can possibly be. We got a properly gapped flipper with our flipper tool, and that is brand new flipper bat, Titan rubber, perfectly lined up with the ball guide, perfectly gapped with our Marco's tool to gap the flipper, completely tightened on the bottom, and rebuilt with all new parts, completely tightened coil stop. Everything's good to go. And then the last thing we need to worry about nice solid movement there. The last thing we need to worry about at the end of our rotation is we need to set our flipper gap for our end of stroke switch. So let me get the camera zoomed in here. So our end of stroke switch right here, you want this to be a gap of about 0.8 millimeters, and you can kind of, if you got a flipper gap tool, you can do it. Otherwise, what I just did, these haven't been adjusted before, so a little bit of strength with your hand will do it. And I usually just eyeball this, but if you want, I mean, what did I say, 0.8 millimeters? I meant 1/8 of an inch. So, like I said, I usually just eyeball this, but you're looking at this gap right here. And the way it is right there, that's a good gap, so that you want it to be so the end of your stroke makes contact. We could actually push this back a little bit more. And let me grab my leaf adjustment tool just to show you guys how that works, because this is important. Not so much important for WPC games, because WPC games are normally open switches. On System 11 games, you have normally closed switches. So this matters a little bit more on System 11 games because you want your flipper gap to be the way that it should be. And we'll come in, we got an adjustment tool right here, and what this is it is a tool that has a 45 degree and a 90 degree, and it's got, you see that serrated cut in there. And what you do is you come at the side of a leaf switch with it, and you can just kind of bend the contacts a little bit, if I can get around it. And you can just kind of bend it up, and then bend this side until you get the gap that you want, and so that the entire motion of the flipper makes nice, good movement. And it doesn't take much pressure to adjust these things, so just make sure you got it the way that you want it. So I'm going to just increase the gap a little bit more. And that's enough to just gap it the way that we would want to gap it. And now, if we flip our flipper from the front of the playfield, right at the end, and actually we might want to make that gap a little bit smaller because this prevents your coil from burning up. And that's a pretty good 1/8 inch of a gap. A little bit down. That's pretty good. So now if I take my flipper from the front here, at the end of its stroke, it'll make contact. So the end right there, we can actually go a little bit down because I think it's a little late. And this is just kind of a trial and error thing until you're real happy with how your switch performs. But that's a good 1/8 of an inch gap there. And now that's right at the end. So that's right before the end, contact right at the end. Right before the end, contact right at the end. So I'm happy with that flipper gap right there. And we got the pawl completely tightened up, as tight as it can go. Let me show you guys how well this thing is lined up with the ball guide. Let me zoom out just a little bit, but you can already kind of see it right there. That is perfectly lined up with the ball is just going to feed perfectly. We got a brand new white flipper bat, light blue to match the playfield. Light blue post over here, clear rubber here. I could have done light blue. It might have looked cool if I did light blue up here just so all of it matched. But I can always change that. It's easy enough to get to that. But that is a full flipper rebuild on the upper flipper on Whitewater. And like I said, this one's pretty easy to do because all the wiring can just be removed from the playfield and you can do it on the bench super easily. The one thing you need to watch out for is you got to remove that arm right here. If you leave that arm on, I mean, you can put the normal spring on if you leave the arm on, but it's going to whack into the ball guide on the lower part of the playfield. So you just got to use the crappy conical spring here, but that is nice smooth movement. Our end of stroke switch is hitting. Nothing to worry about with this flipper here. So nice good contact. That is full flipper rebuilt on the upper playfield. All right, so now that our upper flipper is completely rebuilt and ready to go, we're at a point that we can put our opto back on up here. we can put Bigfoot back on, and then it'll just be the ramps, the sign, the dual ball gate, all of that will go back on as well. So yeah, like I said, we can put the Opto and Bigfoot, the sign and the sign, and then the ramps and the ball gate can all go on. But we'll start with the Opto, and then the Bigfoot and the sign can go back on as well. So we'll just come in here with the way that these were. We're gonna lose some screws, that's good. And the one thing you wanna notice is, so there's a hole underneath this side and there's a hole lined up here. So your Opto can track the ball here. So you wanna make sure you put this in the exact same way that it was in. So I'm just getting this somewhat loose here. And yep, that's nice and lined up how we would expect it to be. And the same thing on this side. I just want to make sure we're lined up before we put it in. Okay, so we got the one side of the Opto tight, and that's the other side. You just want to make sure that you're lined up perfectly with that ball guide, and the way it is now, we are lined up just how you'd want to be lined up with that ball guide. So go ahead and crank this down. Completely crank down there, and then we'll crank down this side as well. And that side is now cranked down as well. I'm just going to reference my picture, make sure my wiring is still the same from when I took the Opto off. Yep, so we had the orange wire going to the far side, which is the way we have it right here, and the wire was draped in there, so we are good to go there, completely tightened up. So our Opto is on, and now we can figure out how to put Bigfoot back on. And I went ahead and I cleaned Bigfoot the best that I could. I cleaned the coil that went with it as well. And I think Bigfoot just attaches with our same 5 wires. So basically just comes from the bottom and hooks up exactly how you would expect it to hook up. We got, I think, 5 wood screws, one for the flasher that has to go as well. So let's see which side the flasher has to go to. That's mainly what we want to worry about. Yeah, so the flasher goes off to the left here, and I have this backwards. That would help. Okay, so this probably goes over here. Yeah, that's completely out of the way. Now we should be lined up to put Bigfoot on the way that we would like to. The only thing is I gotta figure out which way this flasher goes out. It looks to be off this way. So the flasher needs to run through, I believe, up here as well. I think it just goes right up here. I should have a picture of how it mounted. Let me just reference my pictures here just to make sure I'm putting all this back on the way it should be. Alright, so I got a couple good ones from the underside of the Playfield, so it'll be easier if I can see the way that the wires will run if we turn this over. So okay, so the one was back here like so, and the other was running just like this, the way that I have it running through. So your opto wire just goes back here on this side, and your flasher wire also goes on this side. So now we can just kind of line up Bigfoot loosely and get him started just with some wood screws. And once he's started on all four, then we know he's nice and lined up. And I'm just coming in from the back side here, lining this up the exact same way I took it off. So it's really only one way this can go back on. It's just make sure the wires that run up top past Bigfoot, just make sure they're put in the way that they should be. And that's really the one thing you got to watch out for. I'm just going to get these screws started and make sure we're lined up nice and straight. You just want to make sure these wood screws are going nice and straight. You don't want to strip these things out. Just same thing on all four sides until we get Bigfoot completely snugged in. Lined up there. We'll just continue to tighten up all four sides, and pretty much at the point we can just tighten Bigfoot all the way. So that's all the way tight. That's all the way tight there. Completely tight there. Now it's just this one. And it's completely tight. So now we can flip back over to the front here, and you got to be careful now that you got Bigfoot mounted again, because you don't want to break the tabs off that motor. So the last thing we need to worry about is how this flasher up here mounted, and it looked to just be just like this. Yep, just like this, going into this post. Just carefully set it down, and let me spin to show you guys. So we got Bigfoot back in, and our flasher mounts right here through this ball guide and the Cliffy here. And you just want to make sure you're lined up. And completely forgot to take that flasher out, but I'll swap that out while I'm here before I tighten it down. So just a normal 89 flasher, just go ahead and put it in the socket and tighten it. So we got the new flasher in, and just finishing tightening up the ball guide. And it mounts just like that, and the connector just runs through right here, and that is the flasher mounted as well. You just want to move these tabs to make sure it doesn't short out on you with it being so close to a ball guide, so you're probably better off like that. All right, so now that's Bigfoot back on, our opto back on, flasher back on, all our ball guides are rubber, flipper, post rubber there. We can do the sign and the ramps, so I'm gonna grab everything I need to put the ramps back on, and then we will put the upper playfield back together. All right, guys, so we're actually going to go ahead and cut the episode there for this week's video. I'm still waiting on my new Bigfoot ramp to come in the mail and the new disaster drop ramp to come in the mail as well. And I was just going through the footage, and we're already over an hour just putting everything back together and rebuilding the flipper. So we already got an hour worth of footage, and I'm still waiting on some parts to come in. So in the next one, we'll have to apply some decals for the new ramps because they come without the decals applied. So we'll have to apply brand new decals on the ramps. Then we can go ahead and put all the ramps back on the upper playfield, and we can finish the upper playfield. So we'll go ahead and do that in the next one. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this week's video. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.